Welcome after the break. Isn't that too dark? Is it okay with the light like this? Yeah. There you go. So, welcome again. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. And that's our next session. And it starts with the presentation of Zsófia Ruttkay about dusting off the archives. So, welcome Zsófia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So that, if I just hold it like that, okay. Do you hear? Is it working? Yeah. Okay. So, welcome everybody. I'm the first speaker. My colleague from Mohylian University of Art and Design is not here, and unfortunately, Zsuzsanna Torony, who is the museologist from the Hungarian Jewish Archives, hasn't arrived. So, I will be giving this talk. I'm a computer scientist, but don't worry. I don't want to sell you just the opposite. I am a professor at Mohylian University of Art and Design, so I will give a short intro about our background. And then, in this short session, I try to squeeze in 6 projects.
I don't think your microphone's working.
Yeah, my microphone is not working.
Let's try the other one. Is it?
Doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it's working. Hello? Okay. So I won't repeat all that because time is a big enemy, not boredom, hopefully. So this is the university, a small and traditionally applied art university, which is now called Mohylian University of Art and Design, and the future is even more dynamic and fantastic. Everything will be rebuilt, and we will have creative innovation and knowledge center soon. There are 4 institutes with 4 major educational distinctions, and in the Media Institute there are 4 BA, MA and PhD educations, and there is a research lab, tech lab, that's me and some colleagues and students. What do we want to do there? To make new novel applications of digital technology. I noticed that computer scientists, students, engineers can't really keep up with the tsunami of technology, so they can do safe algorithm and safe payment and so forth, but to invent witty, poetic, playful, beautiful, appealing applications, you need an artistic approach. We want to address socially relevant topics, and we want to make applications definitely which work, which can be measurably useful, even if not in the health domain or banking domain. The major topics are museum and education in the broadest sense, with some overlap. We use enabling technologies, whatever is there, we choose from, and what is important in a design school, especially to make it beautiful, to hide it in beautiful objects. We work in education and research and development, national and international projects, always in multidisciplinary teams. Now, I just picked 3 major problems with the traditional museums. Several people touched upon these issues. And on the right, I list the kind of functional solutions the students want to provide remedy for these problems, like provide experience, to make objects alive, visualize data next to textual and audio information, make the visitor investigate, involve, and by this understand phenomena. We want to address the visitor in many ways, and also extend the museum beyond the walls in different senses, like physically and in time. And you can achieve these things by different means. We are concentrating on using digital technologies, and if you have fantasy, you recognize here Budapest on the left side here. This is the Danube, and here are 10 or 12 museums we have been doing projects, mostly student projects. On the right you see the logos really from fine art, theater art, and Literary Museum, so a big range. I won't talk all of that, and I won't talk about this application, which is our best so far, but I already presented it last year. If you are interested, I have some English language folders, but I will be talk about projects which basically were made in this digital museum course, which is a one-term course open to all students, textile and architecture and theoretical students, plus we invite students, programmers from the Technical University Budapest, so we put together interdisciplinary teams, and we always have museum as partners who give a brief, quite loose and open, like they have a problem, young people don't come to the museum, or they will have an exhibition but they don't know how to pimp it up. And then the students go through two stages. First, they have to be educated, so we talk about the functions of the museum, the technologies available today, and last but not least, we look at good and bad practices. And then students visit the museum, talk to the people, brainstorm, they make own project proposals, team up, and then there is a design process. And in a lucky case, there is also implementation and the presentation. It's about mid-January. And then usually it happens so far that the musea are all overwhelmed and very positive. And if they manage to finance that, there is a follow-up and they implement it. And this is lucky for the musea because they see something before they pay the much more money they would pay for a company. It happened that last year and this year we worked closely with the Hungarian Jewish archives, and it also, we were not aware of this, 2014 was the Holocaust year in Hungary. I don't know about other countries. So there followed some events, some turbulent events as well in the country, but we also got commissions for real exhibitions, which we did with colleagues and the team of the lab. Now here are the somewhat turbulent exhibitions. We never talk about it. With musea, we want to address some social problems, to give insight to history. So maybe you read it, it was on international news as well, that the state, this is not bias, this was the background of this whole course by coincidence, we didn't count on this, that there was an official monument planned in the main square of Budapest without any discussion with the Jewish communities, with architects and so forth, and the civilians started to protest, we don't want this aesthetically and conceptually false thing, which you see on the right. So this was what was happening, that the being built monument was guarded by police, and the civilians came there, brought objects, and started conversations. It was summer and spring and early autumn. It was very moving, spontaneous discussion. In spite of all this and academic arguments against this, one night, under heavy police guardians, the monument was built, and it's there. So if you go to Budapest, you can see it, but I rather suggest see what I'm going to show you now. The student projects. So it will be about the forgotten Jewish cemetery at synagogue in Budapest, and the last brief was make the archive interesting for the visitors. So at this point, I reward you with some exploration. This is an enigmatic place in the middle of the town. I was born in Budapest. I didn't know about the existence of this Jewish cemetery. Actually, a Swedish person was the first one to draw attention to this, a Swedish architect. So, as you can see, it's a quite abandoned place, and it's an enigmatic place. Nature is taking over. It hasn't been in use for 60, 70 years now, but very famous people are very daring, very, very special, huge monuments, rich Jewish politicians, rabbi, industrial people. So this is just a standard technology to make this hardly a visitable place, because it's really dangerous to go there, volunteers and like accessible remotely, and see contemporary comments on the person who is buried there, or see contemporary photos of the funeral. This was a politician by chance. And then you can walk around, and this is also very handy for the handful of offsprings who maintain some graves in the graveyard, and also people who have never heard about this. So it's a really enigmatic place with architecturally interesting, huge monuments. So it's also beyond that, giving a glimpse into the life of Jewish Budapest in the 20s, 30s. It also gives about, I don't know, fragility of life. You order all this Swedish black marble, you make a huge monument, and there is nobody anymore left of your family. Okay, that's it. Unfortunately, nobody has commissioned this work, so we wanted to have Norwegian fun, but okay, so it still has to be realized for all the graves. Another project that students did, that if you happen to go there with some effort, then there is no information whatsoever, so they made a kind of tour/game where you can discover 12 of the graves from an artistic point of view, from an architecture point of view, from the cultural history point of view. This is again prototype. That's again standard technology. The second project is about the major synagogue in Budapest, which is very frequented by tourists. It looks like this from inside. 5 minutes. Yeah. And in the archive there are something like 800 of these records of the seats. So people had to hire seats. Actually, they started to do that before the building started. And then, this is really like completely boring, and maybe some relatives may be interested. Was my grandfather ever attending the synagogue? Now, some colleague designed something like a reservation system, but here you can trace back on each seat who were sitting there, and you can search also names, and if there are some documents about that person, offsprings, then it can be also searched. And I skip this. The third project by students the brief was, here is the archive behind the wall, here is a note when you can attend it 3 times a week, and there you can peek in, but that tells nothing. So make something interesting here. And actually what they did was to use a silent film from the 20s, which was traced back by the directors of the archive. So it was about a Jewish wedding. Nobody knew by whom it was made, who were on the silent film. I have it, but I don't have time to show. And the students made a game. So the visitor is put in the shoes of the archivist, of a detective, and asked questions: who is this couple? How old is the guy? In which year the wedding took place? Why do we know that the bride was very rich? And so forth. And then, once you went through with more or less success again, you get the explanation how the archive helped to trace back in which year the wedding took place, and how the dress tells the states. We saw today several times that food is a good entrance to all cultures, so students here also designed a table where the task was to put only kosher meal on your plate, and it also involved combinations. Now, directors of the National Ethnic Museum, Hungarian Museum of Ethnography, saw this student project, and then she commissioned us with 2 projects for an exhibition which introduces the rural Jewish life, so as opposed to yet another Holocaust and ghetto exhibition. She wanted to make people aware of the decades of life of the Jews in the countryside, particularly, especially that they all died in the countryside. And then our group made a table, a physical table, inviting people in the middle of the space, exhibition space, to sit around on chairs. And then, if enough people are seated around, so there is father and mother and yet another person, then an animation starts showing the ritual of the Friday evening, so the entering the Sabbath, and you see some infographic like illustrations and text in Hungarian and English are projected on the table. And this is a nice thing because, people carry on conversation meanwhile. Actually, if somebody leaves, then the animation stops. So people invite them, yet somebody, that's the very meaning of this evening, that the family is together. And I will finish with a short film about this. We thought we are very happy that we finally put our hands on a vitrine, which is a display as well, but I saw in Artcom and other presentations that this is actually well-used technology. There is a museum book from 1820 behind the vitrine, and if you approach, you see, okay, there is a book behind the vitrine with Hebrew names, well, if you know these are names, but the vitrine is turned into a touch screen, so augmented information like translation of the names and maybe also, if available, some multimedia material about the person appears. And 1 minute. Okay, then I show just this screen. So the names fly over above the wall, and then the bystanders can also see something. And actually, this is the entrance wall to the exhibition, so it really puts the tone and grabs the attention. And of course, we turn the book from otherwise, so as the Hebrew books should be. Okay. And all this material comes from a kind of private collection of a person, and then some people from this small town came for the opening, and it was really very, very moving to see the reactions. And I finish with this, that after so many years of making small and bigger projects, our standpoint is that digital installations are like spices to the dishes, that you have to choose the right spice and not too much, and then you can make a dish very interesting. And devil is in the details. So we noticed that after all, the rendering, the graphical style, the right choice of the interaction, the random element, the animation, easy, all add to the experience. And then if you want to be successful, you have to be in constant conversation with the museum people and also with the users. We didn't do that very much, but okay. And that's it, I am finished, and I would be happy to cooperate with some of you, maybe on Jewish heritage or new tools or alike. And here are the website and the email, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, and I have such a terrible job to do here to just give you this sign that there's 1 minute left or 2 minutes left, but yeah, we have such a tight schedule. So let me introduce our next speaker. Let's welcome Ece Ozil, and she will talk about archives as new spaces for engaging experiences. And we need 1 technical minute.
I'm Zsófia. I'm coming from visual design and interaction design background. I'm currently at the PhD candidate at Politecnico di Milano, and yes, as introduced, I will be talking about archives. But before to go into the topic, I would like to start with a small story. And I got to know that there was a zoo in Iran when my grandmother gave me this picture. And the picture was taken from my grandfather, and it was the year of 57. Just for my own curiosity, I started to search about this zoo and where was it and so on, and I got to know some information on the online repository of Interdisciplinary, where there was this PDF document with all the metadata on descriptions and classifications, but there was even no sentence that was saying that the zoo was closed in '92. So here I started to ask myself that if it was possible for an archive to be a little bit more narrative, because all the metadata that we can see from websites sometimes doesn't communicate to normal audiences, especially like me. So I'm saying that I'm not an archivist, neither a historian. I also know the fact that the traditional skills of the archivist will be essentially lost, but maybe we can work on a different level after the traditional documentation and to create different levels of engagement. I decided that this was my area of interest and work, and I placed this my research questions into the scenario that I call the heritage continuum. In this scenario, I talk about the strong relationship between museums, collection, and archives. And as we all know, and we were seeing during the conference, that the structures of these institutions are changed from an essential ownership to a permeable structure, where these institutions started to put their content together to make use of their content. And of course this has led a growth, so this additional information is kind of circulated through these institutions, and it is even cultivated. So at the end we all know that heritage information is not stable, and it is continuing to be transformed into forms that creates not only monumental value but use value. In this scenario, I focus more on what really the museum turned out to be. So museums are turned out to be core places where the culture is represented not by only ownership but exhibited and reflected through a permeable structure. So we can see this change from recent work, the work of Studio Azzurro, or like more work of Berni, that places of museum turn out to be a place of knowledge, where there are strategies that activate cultural objects. If we go a little bit back on time, we can see also from Putnam's work or Novel's work that there is this metaphorical notion of the museum that's generally used for meaning, dissemination of cultural knowledge. So I started to ask, is it possible for the archive to adopt this metaphoric notion to move on to this notion of cultural knowledge dissemination system? And is it possible that such archive can reach wider audiences, evolve continuously, and is it possible for this archive to adapt to changes in technology and answer to the needs of the contemporary users? Of course, I said that I'm not an archivist, so I started to try to understand what I mean by archive. Of course, everybody will know that archives might mean the physical space. It can be also the document itself. So from a traditional definition, they are repositories, data sets, and any kind of document, video, anything that is safeguarded and preserved. From archaeological and historical point of view, it can be a piece of evidence, a statement, and so on. And from political point of view, it can be a sign of influence. But in my research, I propose this definition. So archive is a living place of investigation and experimentation towards this metaphor of open-ended knowledge system that is first of all open to interpretations and recreations, and connected highly with public involvement and engagement, using technologies only as an aid to build up connections and strategies. So how to move on to this kind of theory? I started to work on, first of all, this change in the audiences and change of technologies. And I kind of underlined that there is this active role of audiences. For example, audiences turn out to be more than only visitors as spectators or more enablers of content. We can see this change from, again, Studio Arturo's work or the work of Neil Simon on these participatory models. Just to quickly show, this is the work of, I think everybody knows this studio. They generally work on scenography and narrative structures in museums. This is one of the examples for 2011. This is another example for enablers of content. This was an exhibition in Ruttkay in 2012, made by the artist Michael Sertash, was worked on the archive of Mariam Shahiniya, which was a photographer in the early 50s. So he opened this archive to ask the public to tag the photos and create kind of help to rebuild the history over these pictures. And on the part of impact of technologies, again, the audience, I think, knows all these changes. So type of technologies, interactive digital flash tables, displays, and other surface applications. And on the other part, there are interfaces, more types of applications. So interfaces and environments, these all immersive environments goes to this category. Digital catalogs, virtual tools, and multimedia atlases. I'm not going to make so many examples, just want to highlight this example. This is made from the Studio Last in 2011. It was an exhibition to celebrate the 100 years of social housing in France. Works as any other interface. There is this file of the documents that you can click and so on. But the interesting part of this interface was the information was kind of enhanced using all the open data that is connected to the system. So, for example, here you can see another layer of pictures that comes from, for example, the Flickr galleries. On the other part, there was the whole concept of museum effect that I mentioned with the work of Putnam earlier. And I tried to extend this perception. So, and I have identified two areas, that was the taxonomic arrangements to diffuse memory and hidden knowledge through taxonomy. So on one part there was this longing to create meaning through ordering and categorizing, and on the other part there was this through reconstructions and kind of changing the boundaries of categories, there can be hidden knowledge that we could find out. So work of Boltanski can be an example. The second one comes from the old concept of cabinet of curiosities, but we can see it also from the work of Filio. And I will just fastly pass these examples. So the work of Boltanski to show the memory of the Holocaust, and then the work of Filio about these different ways of categorizing information. So I want to again show this citation. Putnam suggests that when a group of objects is exhibited through a vitrine, there is this visual construction that is going on between all the elements that are presented, and this kind of suggests a cultural relationship between these objects. Moving forward, there was all these kind of debates on digitalization and all this data that was online that kind of was an interesting area to search more about these routers and connectors to move towards the idea of cross-platform development. So investigating on the digitalized heritage on the net, there was, of course, we again all know, there was these platforms of research, so such projects such as Europeana, Google Cultural Institute, with all the open and digitalized heritage online. And there were a lot of European Union projects that were created as a support system for these kind of platforms. But on the other hand, there was this possibility, because we all know that data or any kind of digitalized information has no longer clear boundaries. So there was this possibility to expand the idea of, when we expand the idea of archives, maybe we would move towards this cross-platform development. I would like to show this example that is in the National Archives, made in 2013. So with any other example, there is this huge touch screen table in the middle of the exhibition. and all the visitors are invited to interact. But certain things were really interesting. For example, the lines in the middle of the interface, because any user, when they were interacting, the table were actually responding to the lines. And I say it's more like a platform because while the users were interacting, you can also see from the walls that that kind of document that they were searching for. And it wasn't only in the physical space, so there was not such restriction about experiencing that, and they made also this digital exhibition online that you could continue interacting with the documents. Okay, I kind of lost. And so, my question was, is it an exhibition or it's kind of an archive? So I started to explore these structures between exhibiting and archiving. And so there are such structures that archival materials are not used only to make an exhibition, but they are more enhancers of knowledge, and interacting with it, the information can be continuously grow. I think, yeah, I want to make this citation, but I think I can pass. What I wanted to mean is that sometimes when we are interacting with documentation, it might continue to grow, so it moves from it is not anymore only a record for the archives. So I think this work shows it pretty clearly. It's a timekeeper made in the Museum of Jewish Heritage, 2009. There is this dial in front of the interface that you can turn, and while turning you can kind of experience more the installation outside of the museum, the Garden of Stones. And you can move from time, so you can see when it's made, you can see when there was snow, you can see when there was night. And so to close up, I mentioned so many things, so I wanted to recap my points. On one part, I talk about this activation process is more like what we are accustomed to see in the museums. So not only valorization activities, but work on more accessibility of these documents. So I propose to work on the value proposition, and I mentioned that we are working on different levels and scales of the archival documents. So we are not deconstructing actually the whole archive, but we are reconstructing over. And on the other part, I mentioned this metaphorical use open and living archive. So I'm not mentioning that the interface is more interesting, there is motion added, but I propose to work on the usability of the structure, so a structure that can be renewed, reconnected, and decontextualized. And I also propose to work on the language and strategy for engagement, so to change this linear way to search documents, because not everybody can understand how this metadata works. So, and offer visitors more this serendipitous discovery about the documents. The question is, of course, how? This is the part that I'm currently working, because this is a PhD research. So I propose that we can do what historians do, so extrapolate from the data, or we can do what information science do, so manipulate the data. Of course, there is a lot of curatorial work involved in such work, and of course, design should be highlighted as a part of this construction. I'm planning to work on both development side and the curation side. And to do this, I think there is a high need to foster collaboration between archives, so provenance and keepers, creative and industry, design, and visitors